Today we'll look into a scenario in which America declares war on Canada. Oh my god, that's just sad. Who would declare war on Canada? Like, who? Well, I mean, probably because we're better. But besides that, we beat them in 1812. Don't think today will be the same. But could we be a strategic outlier? Yeah. Would we? No, most likely not. But because that video wouldn't be interesting, well, we are going to do something amazing. We're going to make the biggest resistance ever seen in this universe. Well, then again, would the biggest resistance be Yugoslavia? Yeah. But not a big deal to worry about who was ever. And with American forces, well, after they declare war on Canada, you know what American forces quickly do? They flood into Canada. But this was after months of preparations by the Americans. Yeah, they crossed from Alaska, they crossed from BC. Well, they crossed from Washington into BC. They even take that island that Canada was occupying for sure. And then somebody's like, hey, America, what's up? And a bunch of lands in the prairies rise up saying, we're America. Too. Which is Alberta and Saskatchewan. Which, no, just for a more reasonableness, I think this is what it would look like. A revolt, a pro-American revolt. And plus, we can color them a different color. We could. Make them an insurgent. The insurgency in the prairies. I'm guessing they would call it that. Yes, it's an insurgency in the prairies. Yeah, and the first thing that happens is, well, we're basically occupying these lands. And well, I think I'm going to change their color a bit to red, because that's who they're helping. And well, in this area, but not long after, in another area they invade, southern Ontario, which is where they make fair gains. And in BC, they connect, encircling this area. But Canadians do have plans. Likely America would have the upper hand, even in a scenario they win somehow. Well, where they have the most success is in the Maritimes, because why wouldn't they? They push right through. Yeah. They merely occupy land, and then they make a push towards Ottawa. Which is a good push. Well, not a 3 size, but a 4 size. And while they cross on 2 points from the border towards Ottawa. And they eventually make it to Ottawa and try to encircle it, but Canadian resistance does not allow it. They finally take their first major city at Toronto, and then start to push in. But their plan in that area fails, and they're kicked out of this area. But now they work on the Great Lakes, because, well, they do. And they manage to encircle it, and all be across the border, and now they're pushing to cut Ontario off from the rest of Canada. But this push ultimately fails with the forced retreat of American forces all the way to this lake that they worked so hard to conquer. So basically all for nothing. And while their push in southern Ontario gains more grounds, They're eventually being slowed. But now we will look at the supporters, and I'll be right back. So most of the world decided to stay neutral, except some countries, such as Colombia, Panama, Costa Rica, Poland, Philippines, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan support America, but the majority are neutral, supporting Canada. And the ones that are very much supporting Canada is Mexico, Russia, China, North Korea, Australia, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and Portugal. This seems like some of the weirdest teams ever. For the Canadian side, and yeah, a bunch of nations decide to join Canada's support, such as Cuba. But some nations go even a step further, such as Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, with an official war now between multiple sides. But the sides are weird, but that's mostly because most people support the good guy. Well, the good guy, so they see. With months passing of very little advances. But there's one key thing. One of the regions that want independence, they're getting close to capturing all of, which is Alberta. As they start an Alberta offensive, which they do success in. And they push up the border of Alberta and Saskatchewan, and they manage to do this. And then they push over. And yeah, this is the weirdest look to Alberta I've ever seen. Well, encirclements look very high chance over here. But it fails. With forces being kicked back. With British forces arriving, a lot of them go to the East Coast. And the British Navy manages to succeed in a naval landing in Nova Scotia. And they push up. With the American Army completely caught off guard for this attack, well, they get kicked out of some of the smaller territories they took completely over. And well, quickly, they get kicked out with a major retreat in the Battle of Maritimes. And even near Alaska's border, there's a major retreat. This is mostly due to the fact that Canada has more support. And yeah, Canadian forces start pushing down into British Columbia. And they push into Alberta, effectively damaging America beyond repair. But there's some bright news. Somebody in the South has decided to have a referendum to see if they should join. And that is none the less than Mexico, who goes ahead with the vote. Well, they succeed in it. America was prepared for this. Yeah, in this universe. And they slam into Mexico. But the problem is, they also pour in bad logistics, too, down there. Well, considering the terrain is basically Afghanistan 2.0, or is it Vietnam 3.0, American Vietnam, and they quickly take over territory within this area. But this is because they only have one problem. They didn't send many forces in. And they get kicked off this offensive in the coast. Yeah. And then they get kicked back. This is such a mind-blowing part America invaded when they heard of the referendum going to success. So Mexico was planning, and so they invaded Mexico. But that failed, and now they're just in this area. But now they have been attacked on the south. They start losing forces in the separatist areas. Yeah. And they plan on holding a referendum in Canadian regions, including Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, Alberta, Yukon, where they continue their advance. Oh, they do have this island, just to let you know. And then, they make a bit more progress in the south, headed towards Montreal, which is one of the battles that they lose. They almost get to Montreal. They then encircle Montreal and try to burn it to the ground. But Montreal resists. And this last-ditch offensive by America fails. And that was sending in loads of forces, which ultimately perished. But now they have a problem. And they almost completely get kicked out of Manitoba, even though that's like Ontario lands, and so Manitoba pushes them out. And they get drove further back in Saskatchewan. But then after the referendum, they declare that all lands that voted are now a part of them and will be subject to American law, with America announcing mass mobilization, which is bad news. But considering in this war, it's not a very favorable scenario. Well, something does spark a war. Cuba and Venezuela join. And I'll be right back in a second. And, they get their allies such as Colombia, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica to join. They even go to Central America. But they made one vital mistake. Now all these nations want to join, and right now it doesn't seem like America is in the best situation. A mass offensive is finally declared into British Columbia, with Canada declaring media blockade, and into some new countries that just joined this war. As they took over the war, but they have one problem. Although there was plans for an offensive in British Columbia that was official, they made offenses into Ontario-occupied lands with a furious America. But that doesn't matter, because we're going to win. We have people helping Canada in this war, as people helping them from across the pond. And they push in. They finally encircle the city, laying siege to it. With American forces falling out of Toronto, is rippled across the world, because low morale comes from troops, which allows Mexico to take advantage, making a landing to deoccupy lands that we're going to say America was occupying. They were occupying Sonora lands and Baja California. With a complete meltdown of morale, British forces arrive in the Central American countries that joined this war. And you know where else they land? Cuba. And This is a repeat of America. And well, with America failing because they got so many countries to turn on them, yeah, opportunities are taken. With them even getting kicked out of Central America. With them struggling to send any aid to their allies in Central America. A lot leave after they see Colombia get completely whipped. And well, this is what Colombia looks like after days. Because, well, America isn't helping them at all. So Panama leaves, Costa Rica leaves, El Salvador and Belize, which someone from Venezuela is very upset about with them falling out of the war. But the British Navy also goes into Puerto Rico with Australian forces and New Zealand forces landing on the coast of Canada. Well, they succeed in this front. Canadian forces achieve. Yeah, and they push north. Push America up to their border in British Columbia. But they're getting close to bad weather. And while America is completely kicked out of a lot of lands in Alberta, with them being kicked out of these lands. But they have allies. Yeah, they did have some allies, but now they don't have many. And with America suffering to gain any land, they get kicked out of here. But that all changes for a bit, because they have complete mobilization completed. But they push up into Ontario quick, back into Manitoba and Alberta. But they can't get back into British Columbia with fierce resistance. They go back into New Brunswick, an area. They dive into Mexico. But they think the situation has improved, but they forgot one thing. Britain gets more troops sent over, and Australia and New Zealand. And while they're completely kicked out of Mexico, America is. And while a lot of their gains was made with unequipped soldiers, so they fall back to the border. They even start pushing back to the original stance of Saskatchewan and Alberta, with America trying to peace out. But it's kind of late for that, as Canadian, Australian, New Zealand forces and United Kingdom forces start advancing into Alaska. And well, this is where America is completely embarrassed. Yeah, you heard that right, completely. And well, I'll be out of Canada. And Canada crosses the border along with Mexico. Well, it's kind of late for them, because they decided they wouldn't give up. They even head towards Washington. I'm entering through Michigan and taking a dive, cutting off New England. But no one wants to fight. But they're trying to fix America, yeah. They go and encircle Washington and take Washington, executing the president, which goes badly good. Well, America threatens the nation, but the only problem is the American people don't get involved, and instead they backstab. With revolts and protests popping up in all of these lands. They push up the California coast. And they pop up through Florida, pop up through the South, Midwest. Yeah. Midwest. Yeah. They pop up everywhere. In every major city almost. So America can't sign peace even if they wanted to. With the protests continuing to get worse. And the Civil War getting worse. With America starting to actually unfold itself. Enough is enough with losing wars, they say, and fighting wars. With Canada and allies continuing their advances into the US to provoke even more protests against America. Because America got a dictator. Yeah, they don't right now, but they did end up with one. And Canada dives in, taking so much land. Except pockets of gold. Because why would they take over pockets of gold? Well, America's Civil War gets so bad that America kind of falls into a state of anarchy. With America unable to keep itself together. And they push across here. And well, one more thing happens. And that is Mexican forces advance towards America's border. And then, well, they all have a peace treaty. And I will be right back. Invasion of Canada, which nobody expected. America looks like this and is forced to pay $13 trillion over in the next 10 years to Canada. Yeah. And this is all that's left to them. With rampant protests everywhere and areas of heavy destruction. Including almost all of the East Coast getting heavy destruction. And then some areas scattered throughout the Midwest, and then this area. With moderate amounts of damages taking place in a lot of areas. Moderate will be yellow, which is in these areas, which is most of the US, and then no damage is in the blue area. Well, the blue area is like smallest area, and so America is completely destroyed, with its economy completely destroyed. So I don't know how 13 trillion will be paid. Mexico demanded 1.3 trillion over that amount of time. And Central America demanded for all the countries $500 billion. And then Venezuela just said 1.5 trillion. And then Britain, Australia, and New Zealand all said 100 billion in that same period. And thank you for viewing. I hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe. Why should you subscribe? We are at 46 subscribers. That's 4 away from a special. I repeat, that's 4 away from a special. So if you would all subscribe, that would be great. And that's all for today's video. Wild Mapper out.